All right. Hello again, everyone. Welcome. As we're coming towards near the end of the semester, with only a few more topics I would like to cover. And today, along with the in-class demonstration on the same topic, I'm going to be covering the idea of aerials. And this is something that I've kind of avoided up until this point because I wanted to, and we've seen this throughout the semester, the big idea of being able to represent something at street level or as you would walk by is a challenge, especially that foreground where we're always trying to keep everything from looking as if it's lifting up in the foreground. Those, sidewalks, the streetscape, all those things that you want to keep low in perspective is a challenge because everything is so foreshortened. And in every case, we've always been thinking about our horizon line being relatively low on the page. So like right here, we would have a streetscape very low. This is where our field of view is relative to the object that we're looking at. And most of our object is, of course, higher than we are as humans standing on the street on a flat surface. And so this has always been the way that we've started every drawing with that horizon line at the base. With an aerial, the things, the world and this perspective have really flipped. Now we have a horizon line very high in space and we're looking down. So the majority of a building is sitting below that horizon line. And depending on where we are in relation to the object we're drawing, often that the entire subject may be below that horizon line. And in other cases, if the place that we are in, our vantage point is midway up the side of a building, then part of that building would be above the horizon line and part of it would be beneath. Today we're going to be looking at, and apologies for the dark image here, but you'll see this posted on Canvas as well. It's a kind of twilight time of the day, near the end of the day, evening. This is MiCA, which is a 12-story, two towers on Milwaukee Avenue by Wheeler Kearns. So it looks dark, and I'm going to try to make this, it can be overwhelming as you look at this, you see the tops of a lot of buildings, the street. I apologize for the glare of the camera. The two focus buildings are more reflective than most of the surroundings, but there are a lot of context buildings. And the image that you have, you'll actually see more off to to the right than I see here, but I don't think that the context far off to the right is very important. I am going to try to make these two buildings in our drawing appear more prominent and important without using color, without using the tones and all of the different kind of grayness that you see around here with this reflectivity. There are ways to kind of make a line drawing with just some tone, make this more of a focus because I am not going to be drawing every piece of context building with the same level of detail that I would draw these two at. So this is gonna, your eye is gonna immediately know that this is the focal point. In the photo, you can tell also that this is the focal point, but a lot of that has to do with the lighting. So if this were later in the day or even noon, you would see so much more detail here in the foreground, all of these buildings, all of the rooftop units, the pop-ups, the ductwork, everything's exposed. The trees, some of these cars and the train line here and the blue line, all of this would have equal emphasis. And in fact, some of this in the foreground might actually look more detailed. So because of the lighting of this, it almost makes this look like it's illuminated more brightly than every other building on the page. So as I look at this, and however you decide to start this, as we've always begun each drawing, is making sure that we locate, if this is our actual sheet of paper that we're drawing, my horizon line is right here. So Lake Michigan is off in the distance, right near the base of these buildings. So this building, the two subject buildings that we're going to be drawing, both of them approach that level, but just based on how I can see just a little bit of the top of these two pop-ups tells me that the horizon line is just above that. That's where everything becomes very flat, right at the base where the skyline starts to pop up above that. Our building is beneath it. So as we place the horizon line, if I break my sheet up into just simple groupings, if this is the halfway point as I'm looking at this in landscape, a quarter of the way up, my horizon line is going to be just above that quarter line. So I'm going to come across and draw a line. And I'm really going to try to emphasize, oh, a straight line would probably be better. We're not looking at a hillside. Okay, so this is going to be where I'm going to start. Now, the context can be deceiving. It can be overwhelming. It can be the kind of thing that you want to start just drawing buildings one by one and just moving your way across and then maybe coming back and going again. Because we have a focus of these two buildings, I'm going to start with that. And you might say, I really, really want to get this, or I really want to find this for whatever reason. Maybe there's a reason that you want to capture something here. In that case, you would have to look at this image and then place just the kind of extremities of what you want to capture on the page to make sure that you get all of what you want into the final. I think we've been doing a pretty good job of framing things when I review drawings in class. It's just often we're looking at a single subject matter, and that helps us to make sure that we capture it because we don't have to worry about something else on the other side of the page and getting that in our view as well. And so I'm not too worried about what's going to happen on the right-hand side. I'm going to be more focused on this and then just a little bit of context. I don't really need to go too far. So as long as I can get my subject matter, I might want to leave my primary subject of these two towers near the edge of the page, but not so far as to limit myself with how much space I have on the perimeter of the paper. And so as I look at this, it's really a series of boxes and there's a subtle relationship between that horizon line and the angle of how this is now vanishing into space. So if I expanded my view, and this is Milwaukee Avenue is very, very straight, you could see that in this photo, if my horizon line is here, the Milwaukee Avenue is just rising to the point where they would meet one another, the horizon line and the vanishing point of Milwaukee Avenue, just off the image. And so that point, I won't be drawing it on my paper because I'm not going to be um, measuring with that level of specificity. But you can see that this angle, all of these, all the floor slabs, all the way down to the street line are all coming down to that point. And so I am going to be starting off with the building in the foreground here, followed by the next one and Milwaukee Avenue, the main thoroughfare of this image, to help me as a kind of most basic forms that can help define the rest of the image. So like I mentioned, I'm just seeing a little bit of that rooftop, all like a sliver of it right there. And then I'm going to come down just using proportions. And all again, this is you could actually say this is almost a one-point perspective because I'm not really seeing too much. I mean, some of the buildings in the foreground are at different angles. So in theory, there are several vanishing points here. But when we look at our subject matter, the horizontal is almost parallel with the top and the bottom of the image. And so as far as the our subject matter goes, we're really looking more of a one-point perspective. So the two primary vertical elements here, there seems to be a either stone or concrete clad kind of core element. And then we're seeing, again, just a little sliver of that element right in front that's clad as probably a window wall, because I can see an expressed slab edge cover. And so I have these two, and then again, the image is rather dark. So at some point, I'm going to reference its kind of sister tower in the back here to get an understanding of what might be happening here. I can see that there is some kind of differentiation in level. And then there's kind of a vertical slot window here, a reveal between two forms, which again creates almost looks like there's a landscaped garden on the top of this. Okay, so that's just looking at the width of this. Then I can make that relationship to the next tower. I can come back and massage some of these if I want to a bit later. So if we look at the other tower again, there's some similarities here in the height, and so the relationships between them are going to be very much the same. It's a more solid element, again, very close to the horizon line, so really flattening out that edge at the top. And now the more you look at this kind of, you start to see there's a bit of a pop-up here, but we don't see that same idea here. And instead, there are three of these kind of boxes that protrude from the face of the building on on the street face. But this line is pretty close. It looks like it is the same, that angle as it moves off to the right. So they are similar buildings, but we can see that this representation on the foreground, the leading edge on this building is quite a bit different. We don't have that same. It looks like this one is wider as well. So it's really about finding the right proportion. So in this case, it appears to be almost twice as tall as it is wide. So I want to try to get that also working. And again, coming back to trying to find those relationships, those angles, and matching them as close as we can to those roof lines, as well as the base condition, because I'm not, again, drawing that vanishing point on the horizon line over here. It's just off my page. So I want to then find those angles, something like this. Then we would have a small sidewalk. Just to get those basics down is important early on because otherwise you realize late that there's a something wrong with the perspective, just doesn't look right. And by the time you realize that, you've, I don't want to say wasted, but you used up a lot of time, and it can be very frustrating to have to go back and fix things. And sometimes it's, not anyone really, not just students, but anybody that's doing a drawing like this might get discouraged and say, okay, I'm not going to go back and fix that. It is what it is. I gave it a shot, and that's that. So we're going to try to find those little errors and things that don't quite add up early. And then there are these three almost like protruding boxes that are holding onto the corner here with the view out towards the city. And always proportion, I'm starting to see, like for instance, in mine, if I look back and forth, continuously checking, going back and forth, seeing proportions, I'm thinking mine might be a little bit on the short side relative to the width. So I'm going to add, making sure that I can continue that same angle. And like I had mentioned, I'm not terribly concerned with all of this context. You can see that I've shifted my subject matter just to the left of center so that I will still see some of that skyline in the distance and some of these other buildings, but I'm not so concerned with zooming out so far. Okay, so then I'm going to just carry these down. I know that there's going to be a building in the foreground over here, which is going to obstruct some of the building of my subject matter. That's fine. It's easy to get distracted or hung up on details. There's a series of trees in the front of the building, and I'll get to those later. There's also a series of cars, which look at this scale kind of like two headlights and a blob. In the scale that we're drawing these at, it's really a simple thing to just indicate things without too much effort. You'll recognize them as being a car rather than all of the details that go into what a car is. At this scale, it's really just a series of lines that are representing the kind of top and side, and then at this scale, that's basically a car. It's just two wheels, a bottom, horizontal lines, and a profile. That's it. I I'm sure that looking at all these, it's not even really that important. You don't have to include them. The trees, like we had talked about before, at this scale as well, they'll pretty much just be a singular shape like this, and you might just come back and shade one side and maybe just give that a little shadow on the base like that. But we'll come back to those details in a bit after we've established more of the overall geometries here. Okay, so now I've got the basics here. I see the buildings itself, themselves. I can come back and start to, I think these are roughly 12 stories each. So again, I'm not terribly concerned with the counting floor lines, but there you go, look at that. I got it right. And then here again, just carrying those lines. Remember, there's a continuity of the relationship between floor lines here, so they should be relatively coplanar. Each time you come down there, that angle will increase because all of these are converging to a point off the page to the right. And then these will be, this side of the building is relatively flat, although as you get lower and lower, that line again will start to, the angle will become more increased as we get to the base, knowing that in reality, there's no real flat plane that we're looking at in elevation here. There is a perspective that we can start to see that that's coming off to the side. So before going again too far, I want to get some of these other context buildings in here. They react to a different street grid because Milwaukee Avenue is an angled street, one of the few primary avenues that don't respond to the grid that is purely north, south, east, and west. That's why we start to see some of these adjacent buildings on what appear to be angles, when in fact, everything that faces street faces onto Milwaukee Avenue are the buildings that are angled relative to the grid. So to get all of this in here, again, that is these kind of pop-up roof access, chimneys, ductwork, mechanical units, piping, whatever is exposed. There might even be some like mushroom vents or things if there's a restaurant around that have a lot of other conditions that need to be ventilated. It can be very, very messy. And of course, you can add as much detail to these drawings as you like, but the shapes themselves are much more important than the units or the little details that happen on top of the buildings. So make sure that in, and this is part of the reason why I like to focus on ground level and throughout the discussions we've had in class thus far, we really focus on ground level because it doesn't overwhelm you with all these context details that we now are going to be facing in this tutorial. So I'm just going to go from the lower left up along Milwaukee Avenue on the opposite side of the street from our focus buildings and just add a few lines of where some of these context buildings are. And again, it can be a little disjointed. We don't see the same angles as we have throughout the class this semester been focusing on just a few points that kind of guide the rest of the image together. In this case, we're focusing on a few different points that don't seem to really relate to our focus image. So this can also be a difficult thing to understand because it's not just a perfect grid that we're looking at here. And, you can be loose with these. There's no, you know, like someone's going to be checking to make sure that your context buildings that you're drawing here are exactly what you see. And in fact, it's a little difficult to even see what is going on. This image is really dark. So you kind of just get to make up what you feel is best. I'm not going to look at your drawings and say, oh, you didn't draw that building, but you did draw this one, and I don't think that's the way it should look. That's not really what we're looking for here. And the other interesting thing about drawing aerials is you have so much ability to kind of filter out things that you feel are important or unimportant and amplify things that you feel are important. So in this case, things in the foreground are, by nature, I'm going to be showing more detail. As you get further and further away from your subject matter, things become less and less detailed, and to the point where eventually you get so far away, it's just an idea of something. A lot of horizontal lines, a lot of layering that move off into the distance. So at some point, there's a building in the midground here, but then it becomes a lot of treetops and smaller buildings that you can't make out. And then eventually, taller and taller buildings take over. So I'm going to get to those once I get a little bit further out towards the horizon line. Just always being checking to make sure you could even draw, a series of very, very light construction lines that keep these things organized. Because as you move away from your subject image, it's often easy to lose the basic ideas that you've established at the beginning. So as I come to the horizon line, I see that there are a series of taller buildings off in the distance. Interesting. Let's see, when I have the image on screen, because it's so dark, the camera tends to focus on that. And when I move it, it changes the light quality. So I'm going to keep the image off screen so you can actually see what it is that I'm doing. So there's a series of taller buildings off into the horizon. That's going to serve as the kind of replacement over time of the horizon line. They're going to just be a series of random towers. Perhaps the most prominent tower in this image is going to be 900 North Michigan, which is this KPF building with the lanterns, the postmodern with the Hancock Tower directly behind it. A kind of a landmark there. A lot of other buildings that aren't quite as identifiable, so there's no need to get your magnifying glass out and figure out what each of these are. It's just the idea of them in the distance. At this point, it's really going to be two faces that you'll see, and the angles are going to be relatively flat. They're so far off. Those vanishing points for all these towers in the distance is very, very far to the side of the page, so you won't even really perceive the fact that they're vanishing. They'll look so flat. And basically, what is the kind of trick that I would mention in this case is, and I'm drawing this now in just very, very light construction lines, but a lot of low buildings with long, flat roofs give way to a kind of tree canopy in that as you move closer and closer to the midground, maybe a few houses that poke up in between. But there's this layering that as you go further away, the rooftops will become flatter and flatter the closer you get to that horizon line until eventually everything will appear so flat that it's really just a series of horizontal lines and tree canopy line, that the height of the trees in the distance. And sometimes I would tend to guess that the most challenging things is not the foreground or the background, but the midground, that transition between what's happening where you really see the three-dimensionality of things in the foreground, and then the way you see things becoming more and more flat as you get further and further down away from the foreground, which is like kind of in this area. You're starting to see things get more flat. We're going to show less and less detail there, but it's challenging because it's almost like you don't know. You have to kind of make a guess as to where you start moving away from what appears to be more three-dimensional objects and into more of those kind of flat roof lines. So now I'm getting more and more flat. I'm just seeing a really small little roof line. And then eventually I transition entirely to a kind of tree canopy. And now if I come back, I know that this is a train stop, a blue line. There's a canopy here. This is basically as straight as it can be. And then there comes a place where you see the backside of some of these buildings. And again, it's a dark image. You're kind of the designer here. You're kind of an urban planner making up a lot of what's happening because you just can't make it out within reason, right? You're not going to just draw towers over here. But this is a sketch, so I'm not really going to be spending too much time on what's happening away from I just want to try to create enough context so that you can identify this as an urban setting. And then a little bit more. Okay, so I think that I'm in a place now where I'm going to make that transition from construction line. I've got enough. Of course, I'm not drawing every little piece here. I'm going to leave gaps because I feel like with these lines that I've set up, I've established enough of the perspective that I'm not going to find later on, at least. It doesn't always work this way, of course, but surprises that I could not have anticipated. I could do more. I could add, looks like another series of buildings on this side of the track. There's trees, which I can actually make bigger, and sometimes trees can help me because they can define an edge, and I don't have to, even though they're in the foreground, I don't have to spend as much time working on that. Okay, so I'm gonna now make a transition. Um, I'm gonna do just simply graphite today because I do have this very, very soft graphite, and I think I can get a lot of contrast here. And so the subject building, this is window wall, which at this scale looks quite a bit like curtain wall. I can see that there's a slab edge that's uninterrupted and it kind of just reaches around the corners, outboard of the glazing itself. So I'm gonna add quite a bit of, even right off the start here, heavier line weight because I know that at the end, I'm gonna make sure that this building is jumping off the page much more than its surrounding context. So I might start here, and you can use a straight edge if you need. I tend to even give a little bit of a wave to my line work just because it is a sketch and I'm not really focused too much on the accuracy of the line. I mean, the proportions and all that should be accurate enough that they seem reasonable to the image. It's a bit of a green roof. The only challenge here with very, very soft graphite is they become very dull very fast. Oh, if you wanted to capture some of those, I kind of failed to mention this earlier, those street trees that kind of march along the front of the buildings here. Before going too far, you can start adding some of those street trees in there. You could do that later as well. You can always have the building appear as though it's passing in front of it, or the trees are passing in front of the building, but you can have these almost look like they're ghosted in. All right, so then I have just these slab edges, just two lines that are grouped closely together, which then reach out into this other area. And then that turns, and there are a series of solid panels here that have a relationship to one another, but then they start to kind of alternate and change relationships. So right now, I'm just adding those little bit of details, slab edges, because I need this building to appear as being much more prominent than its neighbors. So I'm going to, of course, spend more time on it. Okay. So I'm going to add quite a bit of tone to this because it's largely a glass building. This face, I'm going to start to just come back in and add tone right away because I know if I go too far with my line work and I then come back and add tone, I'm going to lose a lot of what I just drew. And as you can see, the actual glass portion of this building is represented more dark than the solid panels. So I'm going to come back and add another bit of tone, trying without going to too much effort to keep this in between without going across that slab edge line. You can go across it, but just trying to respect that line so that I'm not showing just a single continuous piece of glass. And here again, doing the same thing, leaving that open space for where there is a break in the glass in the vision panels. And so now this is going to be the side that I'm going to be receiving more direct light. So this is going to be the lighter side. I'm going to ease up on my graphite. I'm going to just add a bit of tone for the glazing here. And I'm going to leave those surfaces that are solid white because the glass is going to be reading as the darker element. But everything has to be darker on the side that I'm showing as being in shadow. Here it's just the glass. And now I'm going to use the side of my pencil to do this. Once I get past this, now there's a slot here, so there's a deeper shadow line here. And I'm going to take the side of my pencil and using it as the kind of the side of my pencil to kind of wash across this whole thing. And now I can come back with just enough detail to indicate these kind of vertical mullions. And again, you don't have to go all the way down with them, just enough to kind of indicate that this is a glass wall. I tend to kind of group them up more towards the edges of the top. And then as you go down, they kind of fade until you get near the base. And then I just take another line across. So it's almost like there's a source of light that's hitting this a bit more than the other faces. Okay, so that's one of the two buildings. Now I can use the same strategies that I've developed there on these other sides for this building. And very, very flat at the top because I'm so close to the horizon line there. And if I come across, I can again see then every time I come across that the slab edge is going to get more and more angle. That's more evident, and then it's going to flatten out here because that's more parallel with the angle that my picture is taken with. And then again, just emphasizing these again. Uh, okay, so then this reaches down. As you get further away, that slab edge will, I'm just making that now a single line rather than a double line because this is now collapsing. These are, everything is getting smaller and smaller the further away I get, so I'm not going to bother with double lines here. There are some protruding boxes that I'm just trying to emphasize here, and they will cast a shadow. So unlike this first tower, we don't have the same relationship of those opaque panels that are kind of moving around, like dancing from side to side we have here. I don't have that same condition here. This looks more like just standard window wall. So again, I'm going to make sure that I use the side of my pencil. I know that some of you are using marker. You can just use a different shade of that marker. Hopefully you have some subtle differences in the same family, or I'm just going to shade that side. That's the dark side. And now here, because I'm simplifying things, I'm kind of lifting my pencil up as I go across this to give the idea of that there isn't a straight curtain wall line. I'm kind of without having to, you could spend all day going through every single one of these like this, but just for the sake of time and the idea of this being a sketch, I'm just adding these lines loosely to indicate there's a glass building. Okay, so now I've really got the basics of what I want to show these two buildings with the greatest contrast thus far. And so everything that I do from here on out, I want to make sure that I'm looking back at the buildings that I've got. I don't want to go darker, or if I do start to go darker, I have to come back and add more to these because I don't want other buildings in this image to take priority over my subject matter. So with the construction lines that I've got, I'm going to come back now and I'm going to start adding. One thing that I think it's hard to tell right now in this image, but behind the trees there is a storefront. It looks like it's brightly illuminated. I'm not adding tone, or I should say I'm not adding highlights here. So I'm actually going to just say that behind this line of trees, that's the ground floor, and it is actually all glass. So I'm just going to draw it a bit darker than the rest of the building. At night, when the lights are on, of course, it becomes the brightest, but here in my representation of it, it's going to feel darker because of the type of glass there. So one thing that is important about the context of this image is that as you can see the way I've represented these two buildings thus far, they look kind of flat, right? They don't look like they're very dramatic in the way that they're represented in this perspective. So what these context buildings can do for us is add more depth and more perspective to the image than what we have achieved through the subject matter. So I'm just adding some dark lines here, and they will help me to create the context that I want. This looks sign to give me that three-dimensionality. So if I come back and I do want to draw these cars, again, these are sketches, so it's like the base of the two wheels, a few horizontal lines, and then you're done. It's just as quick as that. At this scale, it's really not worth drawing cars. I'm trying to distill this into the more basic form to give you an idea of how quickly something like this can be achieved without spending hours and hours trying to make something look more realistic. So I'm just drawing these edges and then I'm going to come back and shade like I did with the our subject matter here, but I'm going to do that without the as much contrast because if I add too much contrast, again, it takes away from my focus image. So I'm just going to come back just to give this as an example. Again, the shaded side, using the side of my pencil like this. Um, I can tell as I've done this time and time again that the kind of other tricks that I would like to just express to you is as I'm coming across, it's like the shaded side, it's white space. My buildings, as I continue to develop this, there are things that can be done if you feel like think your subject matter, the thing that you want to stand out is kind of not, you're not there yet with how much definition that you've established. You want it to pop a little bit more. There are things you can do to kind of blend everything around it to a minimum. Like even using just blending some of the graphite or tone that you can wash things out. And so once I get a little bit further, I'm going to try some of that and let you know kind of little tricks that you can work on with this context. But before I get to that, just going from one space to another, always remembering to come back and indicate again where we are in shadow because that helps each one of these buildings take a shape that becomes more recognizable, that there's a dark face and a lighter face. Okay, so like I was mentioning before, and I'm now getting into that area of the mid-ground. This is the part that can become difficult because we don't have these simple shapes in front of us. We're starting to see kind of muddy things. We can't tell what's, top, middle, side. Things are getting a little bit more kind of just making it up. But that's okay because you don't want to spend time, again, really highlighting too much of what's here. You're just trying to get a kind of realistic look to a background that is, in this case, very urban. And the drawing that we're going to be doing in the tutorial in class on Friday is going to be rural. So a totally different setting. There aren't even really many trees. It's an image of a school, and so kind of standalone. But here now I'm getting into this area, the tree line, and I can start to use edge of my pencil again. I'm getting just an idea of horizontal bandings of buildings and trees and things that are kind of just all coming together in a very, very small space, but the distance between them is very great. It's just everything is collapsing until I get even further out into the horizon, and eventually all I'm left with as I approach that horizontality of the horizon line is just a series of tick marks, verticals, and horizontals until I get to the skyline, in which case things just go vertically from there. But again, when I get here, I want to emphasize one of those sides as being in shadow. So at least I can see that there is a form. It's not just a series of random lines. It appears as though that there are forms, towers in the background. So here again, a series of horizontal lines indicating whether it's a building edge or because most of the buildings in the midground are similar in height, and then the treetops are also about the same height. Just keeping referencing the drawing or the image, I should say, and seeing how true you are to what's actually there. Not to say that it should be totally accurate. We're not interested in that kind of accuracy, just the spirit of what you've got there and coming back and in a sketch, trying to distill it into its most basic forms. Scales are appropriate. So I want to focus on the area about around my building, of course, and so I want to try to just add a little bit more context around these edges. Keep referring to it, and again, I didn't want to use a Google Earth image for this because I wanted this to come straight from reality. Sometimes when you work on Google Earth images, things look much more vibrant than they actually are because it looks like everything is just perfectly in sunlight and every detail is shining through. I wanted everyone to kind of use your best judgment even when things aren't spelled out so clearly. Because it is a sketch, right? So in a way, the way you represent things is not the way a photograph would be representing them. I'm hoping that these drawings don't take you more than an hour, hour and a half tops. Some of you might want to spend more time on them, and that's good. That's fine. I have about 20 minutes left. I want to work on this one. There's my horizon line. That would be like the lake in the background. Okay, so then as I come back, I can again add a little bit of tone to that face and the shaded side. So maybe you're thinking, oh, okay, this is fine, but my building still it doesn't look like it's really showing up very well. It's kind of all being treated the same. Yeah, I've got some mullions on there, but it's not as vibrant as I would like. So the one thing that you can do here, and you've seen me do this quite a bit, is kind of adding that now that you've got a lot of graphite down on the paper, you can start moving that graphite if you're using it. And if you're using something like black colored pencil, is just going back and adding another level of tone very, very lightly, you using the side of the pencil there again, just as so that the whites of the building are showing through much more than the whites that are adjacent to it. So also there are places where you could emphasize the ground plane being in shadow. And there is a little bit of a glare here. So, and at the end, when you've done this, and you want to come back and emphasize your building once again, you can add that another level of line weights to the profile to really make that come off the page. And so hopefully if you've blended your context on the sides, you come back here and then you can really take this up. And again, so you can start to really see the building on the left is now kind of coming out of the page just a little bit more because those line weights are darker. It's kind of like adding the lightest tone without going in with your pencil and creating the tone. I have that very, very uh, soft graphite, so I'm able to kind of create very dark tones, but then the lighter tones become more difficult to achieve. So I can continue now that I've got, and actually, I know that I'm looking at an image where the light of the buildings, the way that the sunlight is hitting these glass walls, I like to kind of take a very, very light, that's my sand colored pencil here, and just add highlights to the opaque surfaces, not the ones that I've already got shaded, because if I do that, then it's going to look very muddy. So just a little bit. There is some reflectivity. And then I can continue going as long as I want to fill in some of that context that I haven't gotten to just yet on the right-hand side. If you're right-handed, it helps, and you've probably noticed this as you've worked with graphite throughout the semester, that it helps to move from the left to right so that your hand isn't resting on the graphite and moving it in ways that you would rather not. Easy to get caught up in a lot of these details and spend a lot of time working on aerials, which is why I have not focused on them because I know that they can be overwhelming. You're adding so much in an image that isn't your subject, where in other times that we're drawing, we're really focusing some context, some sight, yeah, but it's not nearly as much of a focus as it is when it comes to aerials because now you're opening up to so much of the three-dimensionality of other buildings, not just one or two faces of other buildings. So this is actually a elevated train line here. And I don't see the train on the image, but I know what they look like, so I'm actually going to draw it in here. And I know that the blue line is 8 cars. One, two, three. Mhm. Again, here I am at the mid-ground. This is again where things can get a little difficult sometimes because it's hard to tell what's happening, and you're not quite to the point where you can just switch straight over to those horizontal lines like I've done here. Just kind of like almost, I don't like to say use the word squiggly line, but like a line that is definitely not a straight roof line. It looks like the edge of the top of a line of trees. And you can see I haven't added windows or doors or any articulation to any of that context because I am not concerned about all the little things that would take your attention away from the buildings that we've created here. I can keep adding the contrast around here, almost like like there's a shadow that's surrounding my focus buildings in order to make them appear more bright and less gray than its surroundings. Just erasing some of this to make those trees look a little brighter in the front. Maybe I'm moving more fast now because as I get further and further away from the subject matter, I am being more and more loose with the way things are represented. I'm drawing your eye to the space that we've developed the most detail, and that's certainly more towards the left of the page than here as I am get towards the right. Till eventually I move from the midground into the background, and then I can really just again use that blended idea to get this drawing moving all the way towards the right and off the page. And so, yeah. So this is again where I was, kind of just clues, like really, really just gestural ideas of space. And not to say you want to be sloppy, but you want to be quick, you want to be more gestural at this point because anyway, maybe some of you are so into sketching now, you just love it so much, you want to do it all the time and you don't mind spending a lot of hours on these things. That's nice, but I would imagine for the majority of you, you're not interested in spending endless hours on things like this unless you find some kind of therapeutic reason to do it. So unless you're like me and you enjoy this kind of stuff so much that you want to do it all the time, I don't feel the need to add much more to this drawing. I might want to come back after the tutorial and just clean up some of the edges and maybe work a little bit more here to kind of define that. But I think for aerials, this is really it. You know, the focus. You could see the challenges here of drawing something that you really want to focus on, but still showing context so you can see where it sits in a site, which all takes time. And you know, we have to show how things are building from the foreground, the midground, and the background, and how those relate to the horizon line and how your building sits within that. So this is an example of a quick drawing trying to make this feel more front and center, even though it's competing with so much context around it. So if I continue to work on this, I would continue to look at some of this in the foreground so that I'm kind of evenly analyzing the foreground and then just looking across at those bands, foreground, midground, background, and adding a certain level of consistency amongst each of them. Because right now I can see I've got something happening here, it looks consistent, and then I can see that I've lost quite a bit as I move away from the source, the focus of the image, which is fine, but I would want to keep working on that a little bit more just to kind of refine that. All right. So this is this is where I'm going to stop for now. This is the idea behind aerial, and we'll talk more about it on class on Friday, which will be quite a bit different. Almost the same height in aerial off the ground. We're not looking directly down at something. We'll still see that horizon line, but it will be in a rural setting. So the context will be quite a bit different. And the building is going to be a lot different as well. It won't be a high rise. And so with that, I thank you all for watching, and I look forward to seeing this. Remember not to go too far or too detailed unless you want to spend so much time on it. If you want to go quick, I'm hoping that the tools and tricks that I've given you today will help you to establish the rules and things that you can do to make something work, which seems quite complicated. So thank you again, everyone, and we will see you in class shortly.